When a single image of Suga walking alone through an airport surfaced on a low-profile Korean community forum, dressed in an oversized gray hoodie and a black mask that couldn't quite hide the weight in his eyes, it didn't take long for the comment sections to explode. Some called him cold. Others questioned why he didn't wave at fans who had reportedly waited since dawn, and soon, other posts began to resurface, including an old interview clip where he gave short, emotionally restrained answers about life priorities, sparking a wildfire of speculation that he had changed since his enlistment, with online chatter suggesting he was no longer warm, no longer connected to BTS, no longer emotionally invested in ARMY, and before anyone could process the sudden shift, media outlets picked up the narrative, pushing headlines like, "Where did the old Suga go?" and "Is Yoongi tired of being an idol?" with little consideration for the fact that such titles weren't just summaries but subtle accusations, and as criticism mounted, Suga himself remained completely silent, offering no clarifications, no Instagram updates, not even a hint of denial, until word slowly got out about his quiet visit to a small autism center on the outskirts of Seoul where he donated a significant amount from his personal account with no press present, no staff cameras rolling, only a blurry leaked photo that ended up raising even more eyebrows, with some cynically accusing him of damage control, of seeking sympathy amid the backlash. And that's when longtime observers of the K-pop industry began to weigh in, arguing that Suga was perhaps becoming the latest victim of a brutal cultural rhythm that punishes deviation from idealized idol behavior. And just as netizens were getting comfortable dissecting every perceived flaw, Suga's brother made a rare online appearance, casually mentioning how Yoongi had recently been spending more time writing and gardening in their Daegu family home. Not as a PR move but simply a personal habit, planting a subtle seed that maybe the man wasn't retreating, just grounding himself. And in the days that followed, an old fan-taken video re-emerged showing Suga pausing during a Japanese fan meet to wrap a scarf around a shivering child in the crowd. And that clip, quiet, kind, and deeply human, struck a nerve, gradually reframing the public mood from distrust to reluctant admiration, with many beginning to reconsider whether his silence wasn't prideful withdrawal but a conscious refusal to participate in the circus of online image management. And through it all, Suga made no statement, gave no apology, demanded no understanding, but presence, not words, began to speak for him. And when Japanese media later published a feature detailing how BTS members had been quietly donating songwriting royalties to education programs for disaster-affected children in Fukushima, a local community leader specifically named Yoongi for his consistency over the years, an unexpected revelation that turned heads and reopened minds, especially because it was never publicized by HYBE or used as PR material, and that moment triggered a shift. Suddenly social media wasn't just dissecting his mood at the airport, but praising the depth of his sustained, silent generosity. And then came a post by a respected K-pop culture analyst dissecting the way idols are often penalized for not performing constant emotional availability, with Yoongi cited as a prime case study in how quiet dignity can be misread as arrogance, an analysis that went viral and catalyzed yet another wave of conversation, this time shaped around empathy and reflection, not gossip and speculation, and fans began to revive archive posts, digging out old moments of Yoongi looking after staff, letting other members shine during group events, attending quiet community efforts without headlines, and slowly, the narrative evolved. Suga the cold one became Suga the mindful, and memes sprang up celebrating him as the man who builds homes out of the stones thrown at him. A sentiment both literal and poetic, symbolic of how he gathered every harsh word, every criticism, every misplaced doubt, and repurposed it as foundation, not armor. And by then, HYB finally stepped in. Not with a defensive press release, but by announcing a long-gestating project led by Suga focused on mental balance and personal space for artists. A thoughtful initiative he'd reportedly been developing even before enlistment, further confirming that his silence hadn't been indifference but devotion to something larger, something worth the solitude. And when the accompanying lifestyle feature dropped, his first extended interview in months, Yoongi's words echoed the same restrained clarity he's always carried, saying, "Just because I don't explain myself doesn't mean I don't care. Sometimes we don't need to defend what we know is good." A quote that instantly went viral, reposted by fans, artists, and even influencers across Korea, and with it came a new layer of respect, a collective realization that perhaps yoongi never left the person they admired. He merely stopped performing for an audience that forgot how to listen unless someone shouts, and so the shift completed itself, not because of an apology tour, not due to damage control, but because the world finally began to see what he'd been showing all along. That strength isn't always loud. That compassion doesn't require an audience, and that when the world throws rocks, yoongi picks them up one by one and makes a space warm enough for even his critics to rest in, not out of spite, but because that's the kind of person he has always quietly chosen to be. And as that image of Suga matured in the public consciousness, no longer framed through the lens of temporary misunderstanding but as a fuller portrait of restraint, integrity, and resilience, he began to be talked about in a different tone altogether, not only among his fans or K-pop circles but across wider cultural commentary where his name was invoked as shorthand for a new archetype of celebrity. One who doesn't capitulate to immediacy, who doesn't counter every critique with spectacle, and whose steadiness in silence begins to seem more revolutionary than any viral statement could be. And while some expected this shift in perception to be fleeting, just another arc in the endless cycle of fame, it instead began to cement, especially when international media outlets picked up on his philanthropic patterns, with one European outlet dedicating an op-ed to Suga's approach to fame, calling it a case study in humility without self-erasure. Praising how he navigated fame not by shrinking but by choosing when and how to appear, and in that, there emerged a kind of quiet leadership that fellow artists began to acknowledge too, with several independent musicians citing him as someone who gave them strength to stay authentic even when their work didn't trend. And in one instance, a young Korean jazz singer shared in an interview that yoongi had anonymously purchased 500 copies of her self-produced EP and donated them to university music libraries across the country. A story that would have remained unknown had the distribution manager not revealed it accidentally during a campus event. And when asked about it later in a rare press event, Suga merely smiled and said, "Good music should travel," refusing to claim credit or even elaborate further, and by then, even the most cynical netizens found themselves running out of reasons to maintain skepticism. For it was increasingly clear that his actions weren't calculated but consistent, and the dissonance between the criticism he received and the depth of his quiet commitment began to feel almost embarrassing to those who had once been loudest. And so it wasn't just admiration that grew, it was reflection, a rare reversal in a culture that moves fast and forgives slowly. And as new fans discovered BTS not through flashy performances or online virality, but through long-form interviews and translated blog posts, they began to find Suga first, drawn to the way he seemed to exist slightly adjacent to the frenzy, grounded and self-aware, and as HYB quietly rolled out teaser clips for his upcoming documentary. One that reportedly covers not just his music but his philosophy toward life, creativity, and emotional boundaries. The anticipation was notably different from typical idol content, this time shaped not by spectacle but substance, with viewers expecting to witness something slower, deeper, and perhaps more healing. And that expectation was validated when the first 10-minute preview dropped on a minimalist microsite, showing yoongi tending to a bonsai tree, watching a vinyl record spin, and writing in a notebook without narration or background music, just ambient sound and silence, which led one critic to comment, "It's not a documentary, it's a meditation, disguised as content." And such reactions didn't erupt into trends or chart spikes, but instead into hundreds of personal blog entries, long Twitter threads, and private conversations between fans who spoke less about what he did and more about how he made them feel. And that may be the most quietly powerful part of it all. That Suga never demanded attention but found it anyway, not through provocation but presence, not by becoming louder but by staying still when everything else shouted. And as the world continued turning, flinging new stones at new figures, the metaphor of yoongi as the one who gathers those stones to build something enduring became not just a meme but a quiet mantra, a way for people to reframe their own pain and confusion into something usable. And suddenly it wasn't just about him anymore, but about what he represented. The idea that even if the world misunderstands you, you don't have to rush to fix its opinion, that you can keep building in silence until the structure you've made is undeniable, and in that way,